Hi, everybody. Okay, first up, one of my children very thoughtfully brought home a kindergarten plague and gave it to me. So I apologize for the terrible vocals you're going to be subjected to, but I actually don't feel that bad, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. The voice is terrible, but I'm not feeling bad at all. Welcome back to Getting to Know Us. Today I'm going to be interviewing Dean Esmay from A Voice for Men. Hello, Dean.
Hi, Janet. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try not to cough. I've got lots of tea here. I might have to interrupt to take a sip every once in a while. But
Sound terrible.
Let's just jump right into it. You are the managing editor for A Voice for Men. Tell us what that means. What is it that you actually do?
Lots and lots of hookers and blow. No, what does that actually mean? Well, it started mostly just managing the front page of A Voice for Men, but it's now moved into a general operations manager, so that on most day-to-day questions of what we're doing, I am Paul's chief lieutenant, second in command. I'm the Spock to his Kirk sort of thing. And that's just because of the size of the organization and the organizational needs we've had. So while my main duty is watching after the front page, I would say about 80% of what goes on the front page goes through my hands at some stage. Usually most mornings I sit down, I look through what my our editorial team has got ready to go, or partially ready to go, and I try to make sure we publish a minimum of 2, a maximum usually of 5 featured articles a day, plus any news that happens to come along, the occasional interesting video. That comes from our existing pool. All of that comes from our existing pool of contributors, new contributors who submit stuff to us, occasionally a reprint on some other site that we find good. I make sure it all appears on the front page. I take full responsibility for any errors on that front page, but we do have an editorial team that helps me out with that, and that's people like Peter Wright and August Levenskolds, Allison Tiemann sometimes, although she's been busy with honey badgers for a while now. And several people I'm going to be horribly embarrassed that I forgot to mention. But most of the time, I decide what goes on the front page. Although there is a committee, and of course, Paul, being the big boss, gets to publish whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Paul usually takes over those duties on the days that I'm off, or sometimes Peter Wright will do that. Beyond that, I just sort of I do a lot of social networking stuff to keep an eye on feedback we're getting from our audience, negative or positive, collecting links to put in our hot links section, liaising with other sites, Facebook groups, talking to the radio crew about what's going on with them, talking with Al Martin, the guy in charge of the forums, although those, those are their domains, but if they need something, they usually come to me first. Liaising with other groups, I was the one who set up the recent alliance with Wikimania. And otherwise, I'd say I do Tales from the Infrared, and probably more importantly, our Revelations with Aaron Pittsey's show on the radio, plus the occasional hangouts. So I'm a pretty busy guy.
I guess so. And how many tens of thousands of dollars a month do you get paid to do this again?
Yeah, it would be nice if I didn't have to keep my day job too, but I do have one of those. So I managed to squeeze that in between my duties here. But yeah, sure, all those donation money dollars people send in, I use the $100 bills to light my Cuban cigars. That's
You've been part of the internet for a really, really, really long time. In fact, you even have your own hate site, DeanEsmaySucks.com. I'm a little bit jealous because I don't have a hate site. Talk to us about how has the internet changed from back when you were starting with Dean's World quite some time ago, to how has it changed from then to now?
Gosh, all right. I mean, if you really want to get into it, I've been on the internet since like the early 90s, so I'm really just that old. And I used to use things like Usenet, sometimes under a fake name, sometimes under a real name. Even before I was on the internet, I was on bulletin boards, so I'm a real old hand at this online stuff. Dean's World, which is at deanesmay.com, was a blog I started in early 2002. It was a gift a friend of mine named Jerry gave me because I kept sending out ranty emails to my friends about my opinions about things. And he said, dude, you should have a blog. And I said, what's a blog? And he bought me a domain name and set me up with the software and said, here's the keys. It was one of the nicest gifts anybody ever gave me. Hi, Jerry, if you're watching. Yeah, my funk soul brother. But so that was the early blogosphere, and that was a very early blogosphere. I mean, that was the era when the term blogosphere was coined, and there were only probably a couple of hundred of us worldwide blogging back in those days. And so it was a very different universe. Pretty much if you blogged, you knew the other bloggers. I mean, if you had a blog, you knew, and somebody else had a blog, chances are you were aware of their existence. You may have exchanged emails, commented on each other's sites, etc. Everybody knew everybody. I mean, some of the big names that you even hear now started around the same time I did, and we were either allies or disliked each other or were just kind of neutral, but were aware of each other. Things like Powerline Blog and Instapundit and Michelle Malkin and Amanda Marcotte and Michelle Catalano and a whole lot of those people in the early blogosphere. It was a much more tight-knit community, and even the people who didn't like each other, we all knew each other and had a sort of shared attitude that we were all in this great media experiment together. Since then, of course, now there's more blogs than anybody can count. I mean, at one time, Dean's World was one of the most popular blogs online, period. And I'm not kidding. There used to be a ranking system, and I was in the top 100 for a few years, and in the top 10 three times. I got cited by a couple of university journals on blogging as one of the most influential. I was archived by the Library of Congress in the 2004 election cycle for some interviews I did. And that blog, Dean's World, was kind of the center of my life for a while. It stopped being the center of my life 6 or 7 years ago, partly because of personal problems I was having, partly because the blogosphere changed. It used to be that when you blogged, you could write about anything you wanted to, literally at all, and amass a pretty good audience as long as you were funny or interesting. Really hard to do that now. You kind of got to focus more. And I used to write on all kinds of things. And still, when I get the urge to write about something that isn't directly about men's issues, I'll go there and scribble something on Dean's World. But it's gone from maybe 20,000 readers a day to, I would bet, a couple of hundred a week at most. And all my energy now is on A Voice for Men. Oh, plus I also occasionally blog over at The Moderate Voice.
Okay, how did you come to be interested in men's rights to the exclusion of all that other stuff? What brought you to your singular focus on men's issues?
Even going back to the 1980s, I had been arguing about men's issues and feminism on the internet, and had done a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of arguing online. There was a period there for a while where I called myself a feminist. I had grown up in a very anti-feminist household. I'm trying to get away from the term tradcon just because my conservative friends, it hurts their feelings. But for lack of a better word, what I would call a dysfunctional tradition, religious background, a dysfunctional quote-unquote conservative background that was very abusive and actually very anti-feminist. So when I first heard about feminism, I got very interested in it, and I thought, well, that sounds great. I had a lot of negative experiences, though, trying to talk about issues from a men's perspective. A lot. And for years and years and years, I would still write about these things. I was especially interested in the domestic violence issue because I grew up in a very dysfunctional and violent environment. And over the years, for example, on Dean's World, I would write about lots of things: the Iraq War, the Afghanistan, foreign policy, domestic policy, guns. I mean, I was a political pundit, right? So I would write about anything and everything, election watching, that sort of thing. And one of the things I noticed over the years was that anytime I wrote about men and domestic violence or any other men's issues, the reaction was either, or when I would challenge a common feminist perspective, even though I'd say, well, I'm a feminist, but I question this, I would get attacked or demonized, I would get dismissed, or most importantly, at least to me, when I wrote about it at all, I might write an article about recent happenings in Afghanistan, or my opinion on what foreign policy should be, and get 50 comments. And then I would write and run like an ad for Jan Brown's now domestic hotline for domestic abuse hotline for men and women. And we had nothing. Just nothing. Nobody cared. So when I wasn't being attacked or laughed at or dismissed for writing about these things, I was being ignored. No, I did go through a pretty, I don't want to get too much into my personal stuff. I did go through a pretty nasty divorce, and if my ex is watching, hey, good to see you, because our very contentious and nasty divorce eventually worked out, and we're pretty good friends now. But during that time, I saw, you know, some of these issues became more personal to me. But they'd always been personal. Like I grew up as an alienated child and taught to hate my father. I grew up in an abusive environment. And when I came across A Voice for Men, I was acutely uncomfortable at first because I was agreeing with 98% of what I was reading, let's say 95. But I was still stuck in a mode where really, you're going to be offending people with that sort of language, and you're going to be turning people off with that sort of language. And plus, I knew some women who considered themselves feminists who weren't nasty, evil people. Basically, one of those feminists who are not like that, like we said. And so I'm like, why would you alienate those people? And somehow or other, actually, I'll just say it. This is the honest-to-God truth. Two men made me decide, you know what, I'm interested in what A Voice for Men is doing, and I'm going to stick around here. And that was Dave Futrell and Will Wheaton. Because they were very, very, very critical of A Voice for Men. And through my, and they were the ones I first found out about A Voice for Men through. And having been spent years as a political pundit, I recognize what dishonest political punditry looks like. I recognize it. I can smell it a mile off. I can smell it whether you're left-wing, whether you're right-wing, whether you're Michael Savage or Rush Limbaugh, whether you're Jon Stewart or Michael Moore. I can spot intellectual dishonesty in political commentary a mile off. I can just smell it. I can spot it. I know what the techniques are if I want to be dishonest. And it came to me so vividly when I saw some commentary by Dave Futrell and when I saw some commentary from Will Wheaton and a few others. These people are clearly being dishonest. I need to go look here. So you have those gentlemen like that to thank for me joining A Voice for Men. I don't think I'm alone in that. But anyway, I guess I was just saying, but it made me uncomfortable. I said, why are you offending people? And then I realized all those nasty, horrible things they were saying about A Voice for Men when it got rude and weird, you know, when they would get abrasive or say something that just, you know, we're going to declare October Bash a Violent Bish Month. which now is one of my favorite articles, by the way. But yes, it's satire, but that's not, you know, it came to me like a sledgehammer that when I had been nice and reasonable and polite and deferential to feminist sensibilities, people like that still talked about me that way anyway. In other words, being nice wasn't working. And I'm a recovering alcoholic. And when you go to AA, there's a lot of slogans you use. And one of the favorite slogans is, you know, if doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity, what makes you think being nice and reasonable with these people is going to change things? And I also, you know, or a real more pithy phrase that I heard around a table too. One guy used to like to whip this out all the time at new recovering alcoholics who kept falling off the wagon, who would try and explain why they were continually falling off the wagon. Say, well, I thought I could handle it because X, Y, and Z. And the question comes back, well, how's that working out for you so far? And I just realized the being nice thing, 20 years it took me to figure out the being nice to these horrible people with these horrible ideas doesn't work. So I said and embraced FTSU, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, I don't think being nice works for any civil rights or social movement at the beginning. I mean, no one is going to listen to you. If you look at any massive civil rights movement, from Romas in Europe to feminists to civil rights to travelers in Ireland, it almost always starts out with very angry pushback. But eventually it evolves. Eventually you make a space for yourself in the culture to talk and to be heard. Do you think that we're at that point now where we can start to tone down the rhetoric, that people are a little bit more willing to engage reasonably, or is there still a need for that really aggressive, uncompromising stance? What do you think?
Oh, by the way, I just got a question in the comments. Can anybody submit stuff to A Voice for Men? Yes. Send 2 submissions at avoiceformen.com. Send your name and your basic bio and at least 600 words about what you want to write. Anyway, do we need to stay with the anger? And do we need to tone it down? The funny thing is that I remember when I signed on with Paul, we had and John Hembling, John the other, because it was mostly the two of those guys doing most of the day-to-day work when I started. John just hates detail work. I, on the other hand, of this type, whereas I, on the other hand, had just already been running a big high-traffic blog for years and was just used to doing that sort of stuff. Anyway, we had conversations, many private conversations, and one of the things that Paul always said was one of our goals is to, first off, recognize that anger in response to injustice and mistreatment is a valid emotion and should be respected. So we should never be afraid to be angry. But where we agreed was that if you can never let go of anger, now that becomes toxic and that becomes poisonous. And if you can't let go of your anger, and I don't mean to let go exactly, but channel it to, I don't know what psychologists would call constructive anger, thoughtful anger, like as opposed to just raging anger. You get your rage on once in a while, fine, but then, no, how do you appropriately express your anger and use that energy for something useful? So to be honest, this may sound, I don't know, conspiratorial or whatever. Our goal was always, let's see what we can do, not just for ourselves, but for our audience, to channel the anger into constructive directions. Maybe, and as we get people listening to us, more, if people approach us constructively and rationally, we will answer constructively and rationally. However, when they don't, if they just ignore us, or if they come at us irrationally or nastily or lie about us, we get right back in their faces. So I think what you'd say is that, yes, the site has already, and the movement itself has already toned down the rhetoric a little bit. I think what you see on A Voice for Men and in the men's movement generally is a mix of angry fire breathers and over-the-top comedians and historians and academics. And shit, I've published like 10 different people with PhDs in the last couple of months alone, I think. Thought-provoking, sad. It's almost like if you go look at the front pages of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you see that mix of different styles. Your own style, which actually, if people don't know you in person, you sound like you're really mean, Janet. You do sound like a nasty bitch sometimes when you write, but then you talk and you realize, no, she's just funny.
Some people think I'm funny, but actually I'm really mean and I'm judging you.
Okay, well, I will accept that. I think there has been some toning down because we've gotten a little more attention. And guess what? If we start getting ignored again, watch for us to ratchet the hyperbolicness up again. But the more our issues are taken seriously, well, then of course. You know, Paul and I actually have a shared hero. And people don't seem to believe it. I had at least one black guy recently contact me on Facebook about this because he was like mad. Because Paul and I have both referenced Malcolm X a few times. And they're like, you shouldn't talk about Malcolm unless you've at least read his book. And I'm like, dude, I've read his autobiography twice and seen Spike's movie 3 times. Malcolm X is a big hero to us, both of us, actually. And I'm not kidding. And if you look at the life of Malcolm, he started a very, very, very angry young man.
Can I just get you to confirm one thing to make sure I know who Malcolm X is, but is he the guy who used the Second Amendment to carry a rifle in public?
There is a famous shot of him carrying a rifle, yes, but it was, I believe that famous shot was inside his house. He was under death threat, and he did have a rifle. I think there's a famous shot of him with the rifle at the window looking outside, and also at one point he got a Molotov. Somebody set his house on fire, and he ran outside with his family, and he was carrying a rifle. And he always said self-defense, self-defense, self-defense is a viable option. But Malcolm was not in the habit of carrying weapons around and brandishing them in public. No, never. He was a staunch advocate for self-defense, but for nonviolent resistance otherwise. And Malcolm, in his activism day, never attacked or hurt anybody. And that was the thing. If you go watch Spike Lee's movie if you don't have time to read the book. He was a very, very angry man, yet he was very passionate about never getting violent except in self-defense. And toward the end of his career, he was getting more and more and more approachable and open to people on, quote, the other side. Basically, as the issues got taken more seriously, he started to moderate. And I'm not saying we're exactly like Malcolm X, or that our struggle's exactly the same thing, just like our struggle's not exactly the same thing as the gay rights movement or whatever. But the point is, anger has its place, and it shouldn't be shied away from, as long as you always keep to that, to those ideas that holding on to anger eternally will poison you, right to the gut. And anger has to be appropriate and pointed in the right direction. And as long as you can do that, I think we'll always have some anger. But as we're getting a little more mainstream attention, there's less need for it, and that's fine. I don't know if I answered your question or not. I hope it did.
You did, actually. And I mean, it's just interesting, the parallels. I don't know very much about Malcolm X. Of course, I know who he is as a historical figure, but I've taken more of an interest in Thurgood Marshall, who was the head of the NAACP and who spearheaded Brown versus Board of Education, which undid segregation in the South. And it's virtually the same story. I mean, certainly Thurgood Marshall would kill you if you tried to kill him, but he never advocated violence at all. So all of that angry rhetoric at the beginning of his career, as soon as he started making real progress and real headway and people started to be a little bit more rational in how they responded to him, he responded rationally in return. And I'm glad we kind of agree on that, that I think that, yeah, the time has come. It's not about compromising or backing down. It's about understanding that people are now willing to stop and engage. And if they're willing to engage, so are we.
You know, it's really funny because I just was talking to a reporter. I won't mention who she is because she hasn't run her story yet, and I don't know what's going to happen. But out the gate, she was asking me, what is with these offensive posters? Don't you think you're just turning people off with them? Well, I had a 90-minute interview with her where I answered all kinds of questions, and it was calm and rational, and she seemed to be really interested in everything I was saying. And then she goes back to these offensive "Don't Be That Girl" posters, and she says, don't you think that's just turning people off? I said, well, it got you on my phone, didn't it?
Exactly. Good point.
Sorry, if that's what it takes, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what we need to do. So, yeah.
There's a second aspect of anger that we need to deal with internally as well, and that's profound political divisions within the movement itself. You spend a lot of time at AVfM moderating between people of diametrically opposed political views. My personal feeling is that it doesn't matter who you vote for, as long as we're all focused on the issue. It doesn't matter if your little boy is Republican or Democrat. He can't actually be either one of those, but we won't get into that. Every child has the right to, say, genital integrity. But what's your strategy for moderating between these sometimes really angry political differences that are inside the movement itself?
A lot of it is message discipline, at least on my case. You asked me how I manage it, so I guess it's sort of about me, although it's something I think everybody needs to do if they really want this to move forward. I am consistently amused that I have developed a reputation in the last couple of years on AVfM as being like the token lefty liberal guy. Which is amusing, because all my years of blogging, I was considered a hard right-winger. And even still, when I won't go over and blog at the Moderate Voice, they consider me a right-winger. What I find, and that's because, I mean, if you really want to get into it, I have some conservative views and some liberal views. But I think that's true of most people. What I really find is that if you can't turn away from the whole left-right thing and focus on the issues, I believe you're wasting your energy. So I won't get baited. I have some very, very, very strong feelings about issues like the Iraq War, like gun control, like corporate governance, that I believe would shock a lot of our audience, and I'm still not going to tell you what those are. Okay? My point is, how does any of that relate to the issue of genital integrity? How does any of that relate to the issue of boys declining in school? How does it relate to male victims of domestic violence? How does it relate to male victims of sexual violence, or false accusers, or the family courts? If the answer is it doesn't, then it doesn't. And I won't let people bait me into changing the subject. And most of the people I work with on AVfM are the same way. Paul's probably the most outspoken about his personal politics, but he doesn't care what anybody's personal politics are either. If you care about the issues we care about, that's what matters to us. Now, I've noticed there are some, at the moment, it's more the self-described conservatives who seem to be driving the idea that you have to be right-wing, or that if you're a leftist you can't be an MRA. I have seen some go the other way though, and say human rights for men and the right wing are incompatible with each other. I've seen a few people assert that. The only thing I can say to those people is, well, you have two choices. You can either go off and only talk to people who agree with you on everything else and talk about men's rights there, and we'll talk to everybody else, or you can stop and think, wow, that person is a right-winger or a left-winger, but we agree on this and we can work on this thing together. And that's what I think is needed. In fact, that's the way I think the only real way to achieve lasting political change anyway. You change the culture, you change the dialogue, and the day that I start to see Democrats and Republicans arguing over the best way to fix the problem of male suicide or declining performance of boys in education, when I see Democrats and Republicans arguing over the best way to fix that problem, I'll be a happy man, because the problem is finally at least being looked at.
Well, let's hope the first time you see that is in Detroit for the first International Men's Conference, which will be held June 27th and 28th, and I think we've got a workshop by Dr. Warren Farrell on the 26th as well. What are you going to be doing in Detroit? What are your responsibilities there?
Oh, geez, that's really interesting. I will probably not have a super visible role, because my goal is to be Paul's right arm at any given moment. So whatever needs to be done behind the scenes, if a decision needs to be made and Paul is not available to make it, I will make it. If I need to run and help advise security to do something, I will do that. If a speaker suddenly has a problem and falls ill, I may step up and do a presentation. I can do that. I probably won't. But I'm just saying that's the sort of thing I can do. If they're having technical issues with the recording equipment, I can do that. I also expect to be spending a lot of time talking to reporters, talking to the documentary filmmakers, plural, that will be there. There'll be multiple reporters there too. I'll probably be part of the press conference, and I will generally be on the lookout for anything that needs doing and making sure it gets done, which is pretty much what I do every day on A Voice for Men anyway. Keep an eye on things and make sure they're working smoothly so that the important people who are talking, or people like Paul, can concentrate on what they need to concentrate on.
Are there any speakers in particular you're looking forward to? Any issues that are of real special interest to you?
Well, I'm actually getting a little misty, but it is highly unlikely that she's going to say a single thing that surprises me or that I haven't already heard. But the fact of the matter is, I have been working with her for more than a year, and I have never been in the same room or even in the same state with Erin Pizzey. So I cannot wait to be there. She's getting a ginormous hug from me, whether she likes it or not. No, I won't even wait for enthusiastic consent. And I can't wait to just watch her, because I still do that radio show with her every 2 weeks, and I'm still somewhat in awe of her, which is weird. She's like this sweet old grandma, and then you start talking to her and realize she's dealt with pedophiles, murderers, rapists, just really dealt with bomb threats, people shooting at her family, threatening to kill her.
Can you give us a quick summary of what Erin's area of investigation is, her work?
Oh, Erin Kitsy, she started the first internationally recognized battered women's shelter back in the early 70s in London in an area called Chiswick. Um, she was also involved for about 5 minutes with the feminist movement, but left it very quickly because she didn't think highly of it at all. And she's always been rather angry about the way feminists hijack the domestic violence issue, because she has been saying consistently since the early 1970s, look, she opens the world's first domestic battered women's shelter, and she did intakes on them, and she found that 60% of the women that came into that shelter, 60 out of the first 100, had serious problems with being violent toward their husbands and toward their children. And ever since then, she's been struggling to talk about how family violence, well, domestic violence is family violence, and it's not a men versus women issue. And over the decades, more and more and more and more research has backed up her view on this. In fact, it is overwhelming how much research backs this up. But she was this one little lady in London who for years, I mean, she got death threats. She got her dog shot at. All she did was try to help battered women and men. She could never get a penny to help men. Any men she could help was almost accidental. She wanted to. She tried desperately to. She tried to get people to listen. I think it's worth going to hear Erin speak all by itself. If you get a chance to hear this woman, she's like 75, 76 years old now. What an amazing array of stories she has to tell about her life, and what amazing things she's seen, books she's written, people she's talked to. She's great, and I hope you get her in an interview sometime too. Beyond the very personal with Erin, I'm probably actually most interested to hear what Dr. Paul Nathanson has to say. I maintain an active interest in religion and spirituality, and he has written a lot about misandry and religion and spirituality, and masculinity, positive, negative, in various religious traditions. And I think even, in fact, I'm pretty sure he's kind of an atheist now, but it doesn't matter. He's not religion hostile like some atheists, and I'm just going to be real interested to see what he has to say. Plus, he's gay and Jewish, so you know he's going to have an... That's kind of my joke. We got the gay Jew, so we got that covered, right? That's a joke. By the way, he tells that joke himself, but still. He has a very interesting perspective when I've heard him speak before, so I'm going to look forward to seeing what he has to say.
Now, I know you don't like talking about your personal politics. You like to keep, you know, personal thoughts on gun control and things like that private, and I'm okay with that. But is there anything you think people would be really surprised to know about you that doesn't have anything to do with politics? Just someone walking up to you in Detroit, something they might be surprised.
I have Tourette syndrome.
You have Tourette syndrome?
I do.
But that doesn't always mean that you just swear crazy. Isn't that kind of a movie stereotype?
Fuck you. Bitch, bitch, bitch. No. Not everybody with this condition has that, but it is, in fact, a source a lot of my tics and things like that. And I've gotten good over the years at sort of suppressing it, channeling it. So I'll be doing, when I get an urge to tick, I'll do something with my hand or my feet or maybe something like that. I sub-vocalize sometimes, and people say, what are you saying? Are you talking to yourself? Well, no, I'm sub-vocalizing. But yeah, I really do. You got a live one here. And by the way, I don't mind Tourette syndrome jokes. Just so you know.
I'm afraid I don't know any. I will have to remedy that. I will come with as many as I can find.
Please do, and please share them all, because they don't bother me. Bitch! Bitch!
You and I have a shared experience. I don't know how comfortable you are talking about this, but I was also the victim of parental alienation. I was taught to hate my father as well, and by extension, all men. Tell me what impact does that have on your involvement in the MHRM, and if you're comfortable with it, can you tell us what your relationship with your dad is now?
Well, I was definitely an alienated child and taught to hate my father. And that absolutely did lead me to a level of internalized misanthropy and a negative attitude toward men in general myself as a man. This is why one of my favorite essays of all times in men's rights literature is Alison Tieman's The One Good Man. You should Google that up and read it sometime, The One Good Man. Some people read it and they don't understand it, but that one hit me like a sledgehammer when I read it. I'm like, this is me. This was me for years and years. I was the one good man. Powerful essay. But anyway, yeah, yeah, I've been pretty open about this. Not only did it was a violent, dysfunctional environment. No lie about it. When I was a very young man, my mother was 16, my father was 17. His parents had abandoned him. Well, his mother had killed herself, and his father had abandoned him. He had a pretty bad drinking problem by the time he was 19. Of course, my mother had her own really long set of issues, too. An odd thing being is that I was not capable of perceiving my mother as being abusive, even though she was extraordinarily abusive. I wasn't able to perceive my mother as abusive until I was quite a bit older. And she really did directly poison my mind about my father. And she found a new man, and actually they abducted us, me and my sister, and changed our names. I used to live under a different name, a different last name than the one I was born with. I was born Dean Esmay. I eventually took my real name back. In fact, what they did would be considered a felony now. But all that aside, the bottom line is I was constantly, for years and years and years, having my father's name poisoned. And even as an adult, I mean, the last time my mother did it to me was maybe a few years ago. Now we don't speak. But I mean, I was in my 40s the last time she did it to me. She said, "You are just like your father," and she spit out his name. I won't spit out his name. But I didn't even realize there was anything wrong with my relationship with my father because I just hated him until I was in my 20s and I went looking for him. And I would still, for years, I did go back to him and I did start talking to him periodically, but I would still, for many years, still kind of reflexively speak ill of him. Until I really started reading about parental alienation and what's called parental alienation syndrome. Now, there's all this argument over whether or not it's a syndrome, okay? But that is an angels dancing on the head of pins argument. Is it a psychological syndrome? I'll let the psychologists argue that about. When you look at what a parental alienation looks like and what the effects are, baby, I got it all, almost all, okay? And it was in the process of becoming a father and yes, somewhat in the process of getting divorced that I realized just how much I had never really forgiven him for things he had no control over whatsoever. And that's painful for me, still to this day. He is alive, but I don't have the relationship with him that I would like to have, and I probably never will. We try. We get on the phone. We visit once in a while. But there's a distance and a disconnect there that we can't seem to bridge. There's a desire on both our parts to do so, but we just can't seem to do it. And so I've given, I mean, I got to even think, even the bad things I remember him doing, which, because he wasn't perfect, this was the things a 19-year-old boy was doing. How could I be holding on to that shit, right? I mean, they were divorced by the time he was like 20. I'm 48 this year. You know, I've forgiven all, and yet the connection's not there. It's severed, and you know why? It's because of those early bonding years. They were just taken away. That's how I see it, anyway.
Yeah.
So we're friendly. We exchange phone calls, birthday greetings, Christmas greetings, but I'll never have that relationship, and I wish it were different.
It's anecdotal. I certainly don't have a large sample size, but I have been able to repair my relationship with my father, and yet my brothers couldn't. And it seems like when I read about parental alienation, it seems to be that when girls grow up, they're able to forgive their dads, but it's much, much harder for men to do that. And I have this idea in my mind that parental alienation is something that hurts boys very, very, very specifically. That it's an issue that particularly affects boys, more so than women.
You know, it is just anecdotal, and I couldn't say. I mean, we know that the father exerts a very powerful influence on girls, on the man they're going to look up to later in life, and all that. But yeah, it probably does. And you know what? There are men who alienate their children from the mother. It's just a harder thing to do, right? So, but I mean, it happens. So I'm going to go ahead and concede the possibility that somebody could be alienated against their mother. Just not as common, and that might do more damage to her daughters. But yeah, we know the overwhelming number of alienated parents or dads. And yes, if you're a boy and you are being taught your whole life that your father's a piece of shit, consciously or unconsciously, you absorb, well, I'm a piece of shit. I'm at least half a piece of shit myself. And that's your model for manhood. And you spend your time either deciding to embrace it or just prove that you're not like that, that you're better than that. And it even spins into proving that you're better than all the other men out there, because, yeah, I think when you're alienated from your father, it's probably on the boy than it is on the girl, probably. But it is anecdotal. I have forgiven my father. I've also forgiven my mother, although I don't speak with her anymore because she's still psychotically abusive. But I hold no grudge, and I've forgiven my father, but the closeness just isn't there. I don't know if it'll ever be recovered entirely. But I do love him, and I do care about him, and so there is that.
There's that. Okay, this leads me into my final question, that a lot of the issues that we deal with at A Voice for Men and in the MHRM we've got a lot of clear elucidation of what those issues are, and we know what the struggles are, we know what challenges we have to make, we know what we need to do to address them, but there's still these nascent issues, things like parental alienation. And you had a commenter asking if anyone could submit to A Voice for Men. What are some of the issues that you're particularly looking to be explored more deeply at AVfM?
Oh, wow. Believe it or not, that's the toughest question. First off, periodically we'll go through phases where we just haven't written anything on a specific issue for a while. Like, it came to me like a freight train when we booked Carnell Smith for the Detroit conference in June, because the main thing that got him interested in the men's movement was paternity fraud when he found out that his daughter was not his. The daughter he had raised was not his. And the odd thing there is that I was reading that, and I'm going, I completely forgot that paternity fraud is a men's issue. I just forgot that it was one, because there are so many, right? So, well, actually, that's a signal right there that if you have been the victim of paternity fraud, I would sure love to read an article from you about it, although I'm sure that's an incredibly painful thing to write about. But in general, other than that, what I'm really hoping to see more of is more guys stepping up to get active. If you know about a case where by our putting a spotlight on it, we can make a positive contribution, I'm interested in hearing about that, especially. Now, I gotta say, our standards are very high. You gotta, if you've been the victim or somebody you care about has been a victim of a false allegation, I need to see your proof. But if it's good, solid proof, I want to hear about it, and I want to run something about it. We recently ran a story. Now, he didn't ask us to, but we ran a long story for Ben Stolz now. No, sorry, Ben Radford, well known in the skeptic community, who is, I believe, being falsely accused by Karen Stolz now. He had brought up a ton of evidence and put it online and made it available for anyone to look at, and you could look at side by side what he said versus she said, and you could make a call and say, this man probably isn't guilty of what he's accused of. And even if he is somehow not perfect, he's not deserving what he's getting. And we love covering cases like that and letting people know about it. Frankly, even Tara Palmatier, Dr. T, will say this. Sometimes when let's say you're being alienated by your ex from your kids, sometimes going through the courts won't help you, but going public with your story will. So I would like more people willing to step up and tell their personal stories. I just have to give the caveat is that if you don't have evidence, I can't just go and publish because you said so stuff. But if you've done the work to put together real evidence, court documents, present things in a real way, yeah, I want to publish it, whether it's a family court story, a criminal court story, whatever. I mean, we're currently involved in 3 or 4 cases like that now. Vladic fillers in Maine, and the Mary Kellett thing. Francis Shivers and Polly Perrette, we're still covering that. We're still maintaining an interest in Nicholas Oliverdian, although his case seems to be on hold. We got involved in the Stolz Now Radford case. Cases like that interest us. They're a lot of work, but we want to hear more. But otherwise, we just want to hear more people writing and bringing their perspective. Oh, you know what else I want to see? I want to see more from people in other countries. I mean, Ali Marasband, who writes from us from Iran, has published some of the most amazing articles about people's prejudices about men in the Middle East I've ever seen. In fact, stuff you're not going to see anywhere else. We got one right now on the front page of A Voice for Men called Humanist Counter Theory of Primitive and Strict Religious Culture that will blow away any preconceptions you have about the way women and men are treated in the Middle East. Humanist Counter Theory of Primitive and Strict Religious Cultures. Amazing article. I love reading things like that. I guess I'm rambling, but the fact is there are so many issues that affect men and boys that I bring it. I want to hear it. I want to read it. Just remember, if you haven't got evidence, I'm probably not that interested. But otherwise, I want to hear it. Bring it.
It's a good caveat. Dean, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Okay.
I don't know who I'm going to be interviewing next, but if I could, I would just like to put a little hook out there in the wider, broader movement outside of AVfM. And if you would like to be interviewed for this Get to Know Us and you plan on being in Detroit, please drop me a line and I will absolutely consider doing that. I do have quite a few people I'm still going to be interviewing, but I've got some room that I could make in the schedule depending on who's interested. I believe the next show will be on Friday, but I'm not sure. So
your goal is one a week, right?
I can do one, possibly more a week, and more as we lead up. Depending on the speaker's availability, I'm certainly going to be flexible to our speakers.
And what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Probably through my website, www.JudgyBitch.com. That would be the best way. Or you can send me an email at janet@avoiceformen.com.
Didn't mean to interrupt you there. So,
Oh, that's all right.
are we done?
I think we're done. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Janet. Bye, everybody.
Bye.